Well, hello there. My name is John Meyer. Today we're going to talk about mastering, and specifically mastering with Izotope's new Ozone 10. Last week, they released our X10, and they were kind enough to send me both in advance. They didn't tell me what to say. They didn't ask me to make a video, but I'm going to make a video because these are products that I use religiously. I write music for production music libraries, and I also have to master tracks that other people write. Sometimes quarters come around where I am mastering 50, 60, 70 tracks, all of which have alternate mixes and cut downs. So I don't have the time to wait in real time as a mix exports through expensive analog software. I've got to work fast, and that's why I started using Ozone a few years ago, because it's quality and it's all in one. So today we're going to talk about the new features and show you about how I go about mastering inside of Ozone. I'm going to use Reaper, and a couple years ago I talked about my workflow of how I get the tracks in Reaper. Go check out that video if you're curious as to how I get started. We're going to work on this track called Clappy Snappy. Right now I have Ozone 9. I'm going to go ahead and load in Ozone 10. Many of the components are the same. There are a few new components, and the best way for me to show you is how I actually use this product. And I love the Mastering Assistant. I know that many of you think that is cheating, and you're probably right. But these new technologies, Lander and like what SoundCloud and some of the other services, they do a great job of getting masters to a respectable level that's passable. But what Ozone does is it gets you to that point, and it makes it really easy for you to customize the master. So I click on this Mastering Assistant button, and it says waiting for audio. In the previous version, when you did that, you had to fill out this survey and, streaming or CD. Obviously, that's a little outdated. For best results, play the loudest portion of your track. So I'm going to go to the end. A little disclaimer, this is a track that I wrote for an album that most of the tracks don't sound like this. I wanted fast-paced movement, but also kind of a house type feel, kind of a 4 on the floor beat. So I tried to recreate that using organic instruments. So it's like a folk house track. I could be wrong, but I believe it's much faster than 9. Now this is a whole new front panel interface. They've done a good job of making it easier for the beginner. If you don't know what you're doing, pop this up, make a few tweaks, export, and you're good. Notice over here we have a target section. And this one thinks that my track is EDM. How about that? It's recognizing the consistent dynamic of that kick. That's probably one of the tells there that it's a EDM sounding track. But what you can do is you can flip around to these different target curves, and these have been updated from previous years. They took the top 10 tracks, I believe, from 2021 in each genre, and they analyzed the EQ and the dynamics to come up with these curves. And so if you wanted to make basic adjustments, you could just flip through these curves. There's also a cinematic curve that's new this year. EDM, let's listen. And a different one, jazz. You can see it's much more heavily emphasizing the mid-range and cutting the lows and the top end on the jazz. But let's start with this EDM. This will make more sense later. I'm going to bypass it because we're all pros here, right? Let's go into the normal version. You can see what it is suggesting. In my limited use of this in the past few weeks, it tends to go EQ, stabilizer, impact, imager, dynamic EQ, maximizer. Let's just listen to the EQ. You always want to turn on this gain match button, because that means any adjustments that are made, it'll match the gain, because if something is louder, it's going to sound better most of the time. So hit gain match, and let's bypass this. When I'm mixing a track, I'm lost in that track and I'm not thinking about the overall master of it. Immediately I recognize what the Mastering Assistant is telling me. The lows are a little too strong. It's a little muddy in the 300. It's trying to bring up some of that presence in the mid-range here and then some of the top end. This is a node-based EQ. There's 8. You can see that it's only at 45%. So this is the suggested. Apparently this time around it's more bold, and this is what it's actually doing. So if I wanted to increase this, I could. Most modern music has a low mids cut and the highs boosted. So I like where we're going. Again, this is basic. It's been in previous versions, and we all know what EQs are. Stabilizer is different, and this is what I like about Ozone. And it's the thing that I possibly didn't like about Ozone a few years ago, is that, let's go way back. When I started in music in the late 90s, early 2000s, all the EQs were based off of old software. All the compressors based off the compressors that we learned to love, or my parents learned to love in the 50s and 60s and 70s. The easiest thing to do when we went digital was just recreate these old devices. Those were the best devices that were available, the best technology at the time. And then the best minds learned how to use that technology. But over time, technology changes, and especially when we get into the digital world, and there's a whole new crop of composers and music makers out there who really don't care about what Neve EQ you're using, or if you have an 1176 or not. And in fact, those controls don't make a ton of sense to a lot of people. So there's been an obvious transition into taking advantage of the DSP and a new way of thinking about music with these newer tools. And that's where this stabilizer comes into play. It's basically an EQ, and it functions in a similar way to something like Soothe, which is one of those plugins that can analyze the music and take away some of the harsh qualities that stick out and smooth out your audio. This new control is pretty common, and it's all over this page, where you can go down to 0% or 100%, 50. Yeah, but let's just listen to this. Visually, you can see what's happening. It's similar to the EQ. But it's also changing as the source material going into it changes. Let's boost this up to 100 for effect. So whereas on the EQ, it was keeping my lows down, this is saying, well, there's certain times where I really want those lows to punch. If I hit this delta button, which is awesome, it allows us to hear only the changes. Listen. That's a very aggressive setting. You probably wouldn't want to do that. I imagine you could start hearing some phasing as the different frequencies change and morph. But that really gives you an idea of what it's trying to do. It's trying to get it up to that deep lows and bright sound of an EDM track. I could change that. Let's say I put that on jazz. It doesn't care so much about that low frequency. It's leaving it where it was. I'm gonna roll with this EDM sound. Over here we have speed, and this is going to control how quickly it's reacting. So if you want the changes to be real in your face, increase the speed. If you want it to be smooth, it's slow. So I'm going to lean towards more conservative settings, to say around 40. So imagine smoothing, like all the way down, there are more nodes, and so more individual adjustments across the spectrum. But with smoothing up, it's minimized. It's my more obvious lows, mids, and highs. So somewhere around the middle with both of these is probably recommended. Tame transients is going to grab those percussive elements. If those transients are really jumping out at you, maybe you want to tame them. You also have a very simplified low, mid, and high. So say if I turn that transients on, you can fine tune how much of the processing you want to have in each of these bands. I'm at 100% here, and we're listening to the delta, so keep that in mind. When I go to cut, then this really helps you hear it a little bit better. It's mostly offended by those percussion frequencies. You know, some of these percussion sounds have a lot of top end because I boosted them, and it added a lot of extra to the top, so that's what it's dealing with. I like the recommendation about 50%. Pick the target that you want, in this case EDM, which is strange, but I like it, and then make adjustments on this depending how active you want it to be. So that's a stabilizer. I like that they're using these new terms. It's a new way to think about the way we hear music. Impact. You'll notice right off the bat, this is very similar to the multi-band compressor, which is still available. You can click on Dynamics and it's still there, but I seldom see that as a recommendation, at least so far. Let's listen to these bands that it's divided into. Below 100. The mids. I notice that the volume is changing when I solo things. It's trying to match the gain to my ears, but it can't bring it up that much. Perhaps I can narrow this band down. So it's primarily guitar and primarily percussive here. Okay, so that's soloed up. Now we have these different controls for each band, right? You've got your low and your low mids, your high mids, and your highs. And what these are just basic controls that can increase the dynamics, that can expand or compress. So let's look at this low sound, and I'm going to bring this up. It's increasing that initial hit. Now I can bring it down. And you can see that it's reducing. Let me turn everything back on, and I can link all these together. Throw that up really loud. It's really making those transients pop, or I can bring them all down. Then I could slow it down to say 16th notes. When I listen to the delta, I can hear just what's changing. I think that's a clever way to look at these individual sections and make adjustments. If you want it to pop a little bit more, you increase it, you expand it in those sections. Say you really want the claps to stick out, but maybe you want the acoustic guitar to come out in those low mids, but on the higher mids where those percussion elements are, maybe you want to tame those down a little bit and reduce the dynamics. I think this is a very, very helpful module. Now to the imager. The biggest change on the imager, and this is a little harder for me to understand. Most of you know already, a lot of what we hear out in the world is mono. And so we want to make music that is mono compatible. But if you just take stereo images and make them mono, sometimes it just cuts off everything that's not in the middle and only leaves the middle. Just for demonstration purposes, let me get rid of everything but one band. And so all I have is this right here. It's just the only thing that's doing anything. If I boost, it is increasing the stereo image. If I cut, then it is only bringing into play the recover sides. By doing this, I'm bringing everything towards mono, but the difference is with recover sides all the way up, I am retaining a lot of that information from the sides and moving it into the center, which will increase the translation of your entire mix instead of just the frequencies in the middle. Say you wanted to more mono up your lows and mids and then bring up the stereo eyes function for your high mids and highs, which aren't affected by phase cancellation as much. So that's a great feature. Maximizer hasn't changed much. From what I understand, there's a new algorithm for this soft clip. And basically, you can push this if you want to get your music louder before it clips. You got to be super careful with it. You go too far and it sounds distorted. but it's a way to get just a little bit more out of your music before you are clipping. Probably not my best description. I just wanted to show you how I work, right? And at the end of this process, I'm going to turn gain match off. That's important. And then I'm going to make adjustments to my threshold based on the level that I need to deliver the track. I would have bought this, but I'm really glad they sent it to me. If you are interested in more about how I go about mastering, be sure to watch my mastering workflow video, and we'll talk soon. Take care.